Ladies and gentlemen, I'm back. You're back. We are back. I'm back from my little excursion in the Rocky Mountains, climbing some 13,000 feet little mountain peaks out there. Crazy that they still got snow all the way up in there, but it was a fun time. It was an outstanding time. Thought real clearly, got all that done, but we got a game 2 to talk about today. We got an NBA game 2 to talk about today that I am very interested in because the Clippers got to split these two. And look, yes, Phoenix is definitely the favorites in this series, right? Kawhi Leonard, there hasn't been an official update on his knee. It seems like maybe gamesmanship. It's just an odd situation. Seems very doubtful that he's going to return and be in his full self this series. Now you have to worry about Marcus Morris. The Clippers, although he's off the injury report, Marcus Morris tweaked his knee, has not played significant run in back-to-back games. In the last game, he had to check out and not play most of the second half. And with Marcus Morris out in that game, the Clippers had to go to more traditional lineups meaning traditional centers and not small ball. They couldn't afford to have Nicholas Batum or Paul George at the 5. It just didn't work as well for having certain shooters on the court. It meant when they tried that small ball lineup, well, Rondo on the court, that didn't work out too well. So you saw more Zubac. You saw more DeMarcus Cousins, who in 13.5 minutes of play was solid for about 1.5 of them and then brutal for about the other 10, as he was minus 12 in this game, as he had 5 personal fouls, just a walking foul, no mobility, not the same Boogie Cousins that you're used to. This is a totally different guy after those injuries. So they're not going to be able to go small ball when or if Marcus Morris is limited in this game. But he's off the injury report, so I'm thinking that it's not that significant of an injury. So right now I'm projecting Marcus Morris in for 32 minutes, which might seem low. Still trying to give something to the fact that he hasn't closed out 3 of the last 4 games, and there's something going on with this knee of his. But ladies and gentlemen, fellas, that's a big piece of news in terms of the injuries that happened in that first game. Let's start to talk about the rotations that we saw in game 1, players that I don't think stay in those rotations for one reason or another, and guys that I think continue to see significant run, nice matchups, and talk about exactly what we were seeing in that last game, not just from a box score watching, although that's somewhat important, offensive rebounding, things like that, transition points. But let's talk about what we saw in that game specifically and how it can translate to a massive game 2 where, yes, the Clippers have come back from 2-0 deficits in each of the first 2 rounds. This Phoenix team is a totally different team, especially when, it's not if, it's when they get Chris Paul back in either games 3 or game 4. So they're not going to be able to come back from a 2-0 deficit as easily and not have nearly as high of a chance, if a chance at all. So this is the make or break game for this series, in my opinion, and we can start there on the Clippers side of it. I'll have projections that come up on the screen in terms of the minutes projections I'm talking about. We're going to be talking about today the betting line that I like on this game, the props that I have. I have 3 props taken, and then obviously DFS interest on each side of these showdown slates or whatever format you're going to be taking in those streets. So happy National Chocolate Eclair Day to all the beautiful people out there today. So we talked about Marcus Morris. We talked about how that led to some more DeMarcus Cousins run. Since I have Marcus Morris in for 32 minutes, you can see right now on the screen the minutes for the Clippers. I gave Marcus Morris 32 minutes. If I scroll slightly, I'm only giving DeMarcus Cousins 4 minutes of play. And a lot of prop markets today are inaccurate. I'm very surprised by this. A lot of prop markets are projecting that DeMarcus Cousins plays probably 10 to 14 minutes today. Unless you see significant limitations, which off the injury report, Marcus Morris, I don't really see that happening. If you see Marcus Morris again only playing 22 minutes, that's when Cousins can get more run. But he was a massive liability. Again, him and Rondo were by far the 2 worst players on the court for the Clippers. Now, I do think just because of the lack of bodies that Rondo is going to have to play some minutes and more so than Cousins, but I don't think Cousins is going to get all that much run at 4 minutes. So in a lot of spots, I like his unders. Now, Paul George in that last game was fantastic, but really more so fantastic for about 3/4 of play. I have him for 42 minutes today. Here's the thing. They're coming off of a game 7 and a game 6. This Phoenix team is coming off of a couple of shorter series where they're well rested, right? They're coming off of a series against the Lakers that went 6, not 7, and then they got some extra rest, and they swept the team. So they're coming off of significant rest right now. So Paul George wasn't able to play 45, 46 minutes like he was in game 6 of the previous game. A lot of these guys weren't able to push the 40-plus minutes. Reggie Jackson topping out at 39 minutes of play. Look, they were just gassed down the stretch. Now, in the fourth quarter, saying they're gassed might be lazy analysis, but go watch that fourth quarter. They were gassed. Paul George shooting 0 of 5, had 2 total points in the quarter. In the game, he shot 7 of 14 from 3, and if there's no Marcus Morris or a limitation on Marcus Morris's minutes, you're going to see, yet again, 14 or more 3-point attempts from him. He got double-teamed in the fourth, so that doesn't help when you're gassed either. So, yes, Paul George is the make or break for this team with no Kawhi Leonard. That's obvious. Just interesting to see that in the fourth quarter, these guys were getting a little bit tired now, as there's a significant and clear and obvious difference in how well rested these teams are. Now, we talked about DeMarcus Cousins being really bad in that game. Now, you might be saying, what do you mean? We're talking from a real-life standpoint if you can stay on the court. And why does that matter for fantasy? Well, if you're really bad in real life, if you're not offering much, if you're playing the main thing. Terrible defense. It doesn't matter if you come in and hit a 3 and have a nice post up like he did in those first minute and a half. When you start to play 10 minutes of bad defense and you're negative 12 on the court, and a lot of that is because of you're not going to stay on the court as much, which means you don't have minutes, which means you can't score fantasy points. Same exact analysis for Rajon Rondo. With Marcus Morris now back and me giving him 10 minutes or so, that cuts away from DeMarcus Cousins, and I do think that they're going to go to more so in this game Patrick Beverley over a Rajon Rondo. Look, Rondo last year in the bubble was fantastic on defense. That was kind of an outlier. He played 22.5 minutes in this last game. He was the worst guy on the court from a plus-minus perspective for the Clippers at -14. Now, from a fantasy perspective, he had assists. He had some offensive rebounds. He scored some buckets. He was pretty solid for his price point. And yet again, he'll be in a player pool for me, but I'm not giving Rajon Rondo 22.5 minutes in this game. I'm giving more minutes to other players on the team, like a Patrick Beverley, and I currently have Rondo as it stands right now, as you can see right here, for 14 minutes of play. Not 22.5. At 14 minutes of play, he's still in play from a fantasy perspective because he's only $2,600. So in those 14 minutes, for a point per minute producer in Rondo with no Kawhi Leonard on the court, he can see 15, 16 fantasy points, and that might be enough for you. But by no means am I strongly advocating for Rajon Rondo into your lineups today. Here's the reason Rajon Rondo was in the games, in my opinion, in this game. Well, they needed scoring first off, and he's going to be a better scorer than Patrick Beverley. It was basically 5-on-4. You saw Phoenix do this in a previous series with Denver. Michael Porter was banged up with his back, and they were just letting Michael Porter take shots. He was not right in that series. Pat Beverley is somewhat banged up and just not a lethal scorer. When he's on the court, he's there for defensive reasons for the most part. They're just leaving him open. They're daring him to shoot threes. They'll say, we'll give you those shots. They're low percentage for you. So when it's 5-on-4, that's not that good, especially when you are the underdog in this series, as it seems. So they put another scorer out there, and they tried Luke Kennard, and Luke Kennard is absolutely atrocious on defense. They put Rondo out there, who's not fantastic on defense, but a little bit better than Luke Kennard, who is brutal. The only guard that right now seems secure for them is Reggie Jackson, who played 39 minutes, who's by far their number 2 option right now in scoring. He shot 10 of 19, 53% in this game. He's going to need to be their number 2 option every single game for them to have any chance in this series. Terrence Mann started again and closed again. He played 27 minutes. He only had 4 shot attempts, though. Nowhere near his Terrence Mann game that closed out game 6, right? He should see some more volume, but he did look fatigued. He shot 3 of 3 from 3. And to finish it up on the Clippers side of the ball on this one, look, they played really well. They played really well. They just ran into a team that, even without Chris Paul, is amazing on offense, has so much talent, is in the crucial moments more well-equipped on defense. Yes, that's true. Mikal Bridges and Jay Crowder, more well-equipped on defense than at this point Paul George and Marcus Morris and so on and so forth from this Clippers team without Kawhi Leonard. So the Clippers shot 20 of 47 from 3, 43%, and that's with struggling in the fourth quarter. They only had 9 turnovers. They ended up having 17 free throw attempts, which they shot 83% on. That's pretty good for a team that was getting like 10 attempts per game in the first series. They shot 45% from the floor. The issue is that Phoenix ended up shooting 55% from the floor and 41% from 3. This is a fantastic offensive team. So all of that being said, in this game, we need a healthy Marcus Morris, and they're going to be forced to play Cousins for some minutes likely, and they're going to be forced to play Rondo, which is not great. Forced to play Luke Kennard. They're just down bodies at this point. But +6 on the Clippers seems good. They lose that last game by 6, and it took a really great shooting night from Devin Booker, elbow jumpers nonstop. We'll talk about those in a second, and just overall a nice shooting night from them. The Clippers also shot really well in this game, though, and there's not much more that they can do. 7 of 14, Paul George from 3, and so on and so forth. 3 of 3, Terrence Mann from 3. This is the biggest game of the series. I'm going to take the Clippers here at +6. Maybe it's the chalk side of the bet. Maybe it's the, they got to even the series up here. But I'll take them at +6 in this game, as I think this is one we will see the starters run a little bit more, knowing how important that this specific game is before Chris Paul potentially returns for Game 3. So on the betting lines, I've got the Clippers +6 today. Now, from a DFS perspective, I'll pull the Clippers minutes back up. This is where my Clippers interest shrink. It ranks number 1, Paul George. Might seem obvious, but that's just the way it is right now for me. Projects out for a little over 56 fantasy points. My full projections, link down below if you want to check them out over on Patreon. Can help you with DFS, can help you with player props. We have a bunch of other stuff on there, lineup optimizers, Discord access, whole lot. That's just the start, if you will. Marcus Morris, number 2. And then after that, it's just kind of a bunch of toss-ups. If you want to punt with Rajon Rondo, that's fine. If you want to punt with Ivica Zubac, that's fine. I would say Reggie Jackson's probably my number 3 option. And then Batum and Terrence Mann also in a player pool. But the strong and away guys that I like the most, Paul George, Marcus Morris, and then probably a punt in Rajon Rondo if you needed to. I think there's maybe 1 or 2 other better punts on the slate. We can get to them in a second. Now, I told you I took 3 props, I took it over on Prize Picks, which is linked down below. If you want a free money prop to start with, if you use the link in the description below, it's just over-unders on points, fantasy points, rebounds, assists, three-pointers, all that type of stuff. You can check it out on Prize Picks. It's legal in a lot more states than you might even think. Florida and New York, to name a few that don't have a lot of other legal things from a sports betting perspective. New York specifically has nothing else right now. The only spot to be betting over there. So you just take the over-unders. That's as simple as that. If you want some free money to bet with right away, you use the code SAL, my name, SAL, the link in the description below. They're partners of ours. And they'll say, oh, you came from Sal's channel. Any money you put in will match you up to $100. We'll give you some free betting credits to use. So if you have $50 in you want to try it out with, they'll give you 50 right back. Now you have $100 Rooskies. You get a little bit extra run out of that, a little bit extra chance to run it up with that. So again, you use that code SAL, S-A-L, free money, free bets. I don't know what you're waiting for if you're not doing it. I have Rondo under 15.5 in this game. Again, I have Rondo right now projected for 13.3 points. 15.5 is not a terrible line, but I think if anything, they're going to play him significantly less run than the similar to more run that you saw in game 1. And then I feel very confident about DeMarcus Cousins as long as, look, if the health of Marcus Morris is good, there's a really good chance DeMarcus Cousins doesn't even step on the court in this game. I've met 4 minutes of play. If Marcus Morris can get up to playing 30-plus minutes again, there's probably no chance DeMarcus Cousins, outside of Zubac foul trouble, gets on the court. If Marcus Morris is not as healthy as we think he is, well, then you might see this end up happening, but I'll take the under on those two. We'll get to my other prop once we break down Phoenix, which is about to be right now. So, as we break down Phoenix on this one, there was no Chris Paul game 1. He's not going to be playing in game 2. That's why we need the Clippers, or the Clippers are going to need to win this game if they want any chance in this series. Booker did whatever he wanted in game 1, and it's hard to see them stopping that outside of him just missing shots. He shot 15 of 29 in this game, 52%. His first career triple-double, and it was a massive one with 13 rebounds in this game. 11 assists. If you watch the game, you know that he was doing anything he wanted from the mid-range, specifically the exact same elbow jumper. Why was this happening? Why was this so simple for him? Well, his defenders were, Rajon Rondo at times, Patrick Beverley, Luke Kennard for a couple of minutes of the game, and when that's going to happen, he's just rising up over them. He is a taller, lengthier guard. He's able to shoot over top of them. If you think of it from like a Durant perspective, totally different, but Durant, in terms of his length, he can shoot over PJ Tucker. It doesn't matter who you put on him. He can shoot over them. He has that cheat code to it. That's what Devin Booker was doing, and Devin Booker was seeing these open shots from the jumper because of his ability to elevate. The pick and roll was working fantastic in this game. If you're going to have Zubac on the court, anytime that he's on the court, with Devin Booker was torching him. If Chris Paul comes back, Zubac might not have to play any minutes in this series because it's going to be very bad for them. Somebody else who played in this series was Etuan Moore. Don't expect to see that again. I'm pulling up Phoenix's minutes on the screen. I'm giving Booker 42. He played 43 in the last game. But somebody who played in this series was Etuan Moore. And you see, if I scroll a little bit, I have Etuan Moore for 2 minutes. He played about 10 and a half in that last game. I'm not expecting to see him play run. I expect him to go a little bit smaller, give Javon Carter, who can actually play some defense, some run. Etuan Moore was as bad as it gets in that game. If they go out there and play 10 more minutes of Etuan Moore, that is terrible. He gave them nothing. He was absolutely brutal. He was brutal. He looked slow on defense. It did not look like he knew his assignments. Booker was yelling at him at points. In about 10 minutes of play, he was -5 overall. So I'm projecting in some Javon Carter run and even some Langston Galloway run just for 2 minutes. Look, if Etuan Moore ends up playing 6 minutes, so be it. I just don't see how they continue to roll him out there for 10 minutes. Especially when you actually have a guard. Yes, you would be going small, but you have a guard in Javon Carter who's more versatile, at least, definitely defensively, and also can handle the ball. We have to talk about DeAndre Ayton, who in this game right now I projected for 36 minutes. Look, if Marcus Morris is banged up, it only helps Ayton more because if they're going to keep a traditional center out there, it's easier for Ayton to stay out there. But the whole theory of small ball, one, is to have more shooters on the court, but also maybe force the other team's center off the court if they give them an edge. And Ayton definitely gives them an edge. But the only way that that's going to work is if Ayton is not rebounding, if he's not getting back, if he's not scoring, and he was doing all those things still, right? He was 10 of 14, still shot over 70% from the field. He had 9 points in this game. If Ayton gets the ball in the paint, it's going in the basket. It's as simple as that. He looks fantastic right now. Paul George, after the game, basically said that he is the toughest rim protector that they've had to face yet, which is probably a slate at Rudy Gobert, which is the defensive player of the year. Pretty is a little slash there at him. But Ayton, just like Booker, is elevating during these playoffs right now. This entire Suns team is elevating. Jay Crowder remaining basically the same solid player he is. McCall Bridges having massive games at times. But Ayton looking very good. Dominated Cousins when Cousins was in there. Another reason Cousins probably can't play in this game. Ayton did whatever he wanted against him. He halted Paul George at the rim a couple of times. Ayton continues to look fantastic. I have Ayton for 36 minutes today, and I have Ayton currently for fantasy points-wise 38.53, which would be the over in a lot of the prop markets. Cam Johnson closed out this game. I think there's a couple reasons why. He played 24 and a half minutes total. I only have him in this game right now for 22 minutes. It's likely because Cam Payne picked up his 5th foul. It was like his 3rd, 4th, and 5th foul late in the 4th quarter, and we could show you that right now. So right above my head is the run that Cameron Payne played. He started the game. The purple is when Cameron Payne is playing. Right here in the 1st quarter, he had a 6-minute stint. But if we scroll to the 4th quarter right here, this 5.5-minute block, he picks up his 3rd personal foul, his 4th, and then his 5th. So in about a 4.5-minute span, he ends up picking up 3 personal fouls. So at that point, there's 5.5 minutes left in the game. They check him out for about 5 of those minutes. He checks back in to close out the final 30 seconds of the game or so. My guess is that if that campaign is not picking up a bunch of fouls, if he's not having a technical foul, if he's not missing his shots, and he's actually, not getting in foul trouble, playing well, he probably doesn't end up coming out of the game there, which means that you probably see about 4 to 5 less minutes from a Cameron Johnson. So I ended up giving him 22. We'll split the difference there. Like I said, the Suns played fantastic. They shot 40+% from 3, 55% from the field, thanks to Booker and Ayton being so efficient inside the paint and at the jumper. And they only had 7 turnovers. So as good of a game as you'll get from the Suns, and really as good of a game as you might see from the Clippers shooting-wise. Something has to give here. If they're both going to play that well, if they both still don't have a key piece on their team, Kawhi and Chris Paul, again, I'll take the +6 from the Clippers side of it. Now, who do I like more on the Suns side of the ball right now, rankings-wise? Well, it's going to be right now for me, Cameron Payne 1, number 2, Booker, and number 3, Jay Crowder. Now, in there right now, I do have some punts that rank higher just because they're so cheap. Like Javon Carter is $1,000 today. I only have him for 5.5 fantasy points, but at $1,000, that can get it done, especially if he takes all of that 10 minutes to 10.5 minutes from Etuan Moore. He can just as easily see 0 minutes of play, but this is why we're trying to project this in. Torrey Craig played about 15 minutes in that last game, scored 18 fantasy points. He has been over a fantasy point per minute producer, and we can pull that up with Chris Paul off the court this season. Now, let's pull that up. So if we take Chris Paul off since the beginning of April, so it's more of a cleaner sample after the trade deadline. If we go to Torrey Craig right here, you can see Torrey Craig in 267 minutes of play with no Chris Paul on the court, he is averaging 1.05 fantasy points per minute. So even if he can just get on the court today for 12 minutes of play, he's going to probably pick up close to 13 fantasy points. Once he starts playing another 14 or 15 like last game, he starts to project out now for me for Torrey Craig for close to 16 fantasy points. Torrey Craig at $3,400 to me looks like the best punt play on the slate today. He's right up there with like a Rajon Rondo type. And then everybody else that's basically going to see significant run is in a player pool in a showdown slate, whether it's McCall Bridges, Cameron Johnson, all these types of players, DeAndre Ayton. Those guys are in a player pool for me right now. I have 16 players in a player pool today for the showdown slate from the DFS standpoints, and 5 of those players right now are priorities as yeses for me. You can see those 5 down below on Patreon if you'd like to see exactly where everything ranks out. Now, I told you I had 2 props overall from the Clippers. We told you the unders on Cousins and Rajon Rondo. I have 1 prop so far. I'm probably going to add more. We'll be live an hour before the game start or so. Later today, we can talk more about this, answer all your questions. But the other prop I have placed right now is Jay Crowder over 23.5 fantasy points. I currently have Jay Crowder today projecting out for over 32 minutes of play, and I have Jay Crowder as an interest of mine, a strong one for 29.2 fantasy points. I like what I saw in that first game. He matches up well for them. He gives them versatility defensively from 3, inside the paint, rebounding-wise. Jay Crowder over 23.5. I'm about 6 points over my projections. I'll take that one. Yes, I will. So thanks for tuning into Game 2. We'll be breaking down Milwaukee and Atlanta Game 1 tomorrow, but we're going to focus specifically on Game 2 today. It's the only game going on, and we'll be talking about it more on the live stream later today. So like and subscribe. Be sure to hit the notification bell so you're notified of when we're going live. This was an in-depth breakdown of what happened in Game 1, what I expect to carry over into Game 2, and how that can help us in all the betting markets, the prop markets, and the DFS markets. You're not going to find any better analysis anywhere out there in the streets. Thank you for tuning in today. If you stayed till the end, I'll let you know about a lineup that I'm looking at right now for SuperDraft. SuperDraft, there's $2,000 to first. These contests don't fill. $10,000 guaranteed today. And what is SuperDraft? You just build out any lineup you want based on pure fantasy points. So they have multipliers, so it makes it a little bit different. Instead of salaries, you get multiplied by your multiplier. Devin Booker, a 1x multiplier. If he scores 50, you multiply it by 1, he gets 50. This is a lineup right now that I'm liking a lot. I think Reggie Jackson is the best captain by far and away. I have Reggie Jackson projected for 7 more points than anybody else, and if your name is not Nicholas Batum, 11 more points than anybody else today on the SuperDraft slate. His multiplier is insane. His multiplier is as if he's a backup guard right now, and he's clearly the number 2 option from a scoring perspective on this Clippers team. So Reggie Jackson right now, and then these are other guys that I like to fill out the lineup. Terrence Mann, just high multiplier guys who project out nice for me. These are my 5 highest projected SuperDraft plays today as it stands right now. Cameron Payne, Paul George, Terrence Mann. If you want to try out SuperDraft, you can use this lineup. You can mix and match with a couple other guys. Devin Booker looks fine. There's some other players. Marcus Morris, if healthy, looks fine. Use the code SAL. You'll get $25 to play with. This contest is only $20 to enter. There you go. There's some more free dollar rooskies for you. Some free schmacks. SuperDraft, $2,000 first, $10,000 tournament, and the contest is not going to fill. Check both of those partners out in Prize Picks and SuperDraft while both of their limited time offers last. Even if you don't want to play tonight, the offer might be done by the end of the week. Thank you all, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace out, gang.